The pain you carry is not born from what happened to you. It is born from the silent resistance within you, the quiet refusal to accept reality as it is. This truth is uncomfortable, even unsettling, because it shifts the responsibility inward. Most people spend their entire lives believing that suffering is caused by external events, by betrayal, loss, failure, or injustice. Yet what truly keeps the wound alive is not the event itself, but the ongoing conflict between what is and what you believe should have been. Think about the moments in your life that hurt the most, a relationship that ended unexpectedly, a betrayal that shattered your trust, an opportunity that slipped through your hands. The initial pain is real and unavoidable. It is part of being human. But what transforms that pain into long-term suffering is something deeper, something internal. It is the voice inside your mind that insists this should not have happened, that things should be different, that reality itself is somehow wrong. And in that moment, suffering begins to take root. The human mind is designed to seek control. It craves certainty, stability, and predictability. It wants life to unfold according to its expectations. But life does not follow your script. It moves in its own rhythm, indifferent to your preferences. And when reality diverges from what you wanted, the mind reacts. It resists, it fights, it rejects what is happening. That resistance becomes the fuel that keeps suffering alive long after the event has passed. Consider a breakup. The natural pain of losing someone you love may last for a period of time. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months. But for many, the suffering continues for years. Not because the loss itself remains, but because the mind refuses to release it. It replays memories, clings to what once was, and constructs endless narratives about how things should have turned out differently. The pain is no longer just about the loss. It becomes about the refusal to let go of the past. This pattern repeats across every form of emotional pain. Whether it is rejection, failure, betrayal, or disappointment, the event itself is only the beginning. What follows is a mental struggle against reality, a battle that cannot be won. And it is this unwinnable fight that turns temporary pain into prolonged suffering. So the question becomes, how do you break free from this cycle? The answer lies in a principle that is both simple and deeply transformative: acceptance. Not passive resignation, not approval of what happened, but a conscious decision to stop fighting reality. Acceptance means recognizing that what has happened is already done. It cannot be changed, undone, or rewritten. And continuing to resist it only prolongs your suffering. When you truly accept a situation, something shifts within you. The emotional weight begins to ease, not because the pain disappears instantly, but because you're no longer feeding it. You're no longer adding layers of resistance on top of the original experience. Instead, you begin to redirect your energy toward what is still within your control, your response, your perspective, and your actions moving forward. Imagine someone who has just lost their job. If they remain trapped in anger and resentment, constantly replaying the injustice of the situation, they carry that pain into every future experience. It becomes part of their identity. But if they accept what has happened and ask themselves what can be done next, they begin to reclaim their power. The same event leads to a completely different outcome, not because the situation changed, but because their relationship to it changed. This is where a deeper understanding begins to emerge. Pain is not unique to you. It is a universal part of the human experience. Everyone suffers in some form. What separates those who grow from those who remain stuck is not the amount of pain they encounter, but how they relate to it. Those who resist it become trapped within it. Those who accept it begin to transform through it. There is a realization that often comes as a shock. Much of the suffering you have experienced did not come directly from the event itself. It came from how tightly you held onto it afterward. A betrayal may have lasted a moment, but resentment can last for years. A missed opportunity may have passed quickly, but the obsession with what could have been can linger indefinitely. The longer you resist, the longer the suffering persists. And when that resistance finally loosens, something remarkable happens. The pain does not vanish instantly, but it begins to lose its intensity. It becomes lighter, more manageable, less defining. Over time, it transforms from a burden into a lesson, from something that controls you into something that teaches you. But this is only the surface. Beneath this dynamic lies something even more powerful, something that explains why so many people find themselves repeating the same patterns of pain over and over again, even when they understand all of this intellectually, because the truth is, your suffering is not only sustained by resistance, it is also shaped by the unconscious patterns that operate within you. Your unconscious mind plays a far greater role in your life than you may realize. It is like an invisible script that guides your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without your awareness. And unless you bring this script into the light, it continues to direct your life from behind the scenes. This is why pain often feels repetitive. You may notice yourself encountering the same types of relationships, the same emotional struggles, the same patterns of disappointment. It can feel as though life is simply repeating itself, as though you're caught in a loop that you cannot escape. But this repetition is not random. It is not fate working against you. It is the result of patterns that were formed earlier in your life, patterns that have become familiar to your mind. The unconscious does not seek happiness. It seeks familiarity. Whatever emotional environment you were exposed to in your early years becomes your internal reference point for what feels normal. Even if that environment included pain, instability, or rejection, your mind learns to recognize it as something known. And what is known feels safe, even when it hurts. If you grew up in an environment where love was inconsistent or tied to pain, you may find yourself drawn to relationships that recreate that same emotional dynamic. Not because you consciously want to suffer, but because your system recognizes that pattern. It feels familiar, and familiarity to the unconscious mind is interpreted as safety. This is where self-sabotage begins to take shape. You may find yourself pulling away from healthy situations or unconsciously creating conflict where none needs to exist. You may avoid opportunities that could lead to growth simply because they feel unfamiliar and therefore threatening. And when these patterns repeat, it is easy to believe that something outside of you is responsible, that you are unlucky, or that life is simply unfair. But the deeper truth is that these patterns are being recreated from within. This realization is not meant to place blame on you. It is meant to give you power. Because if these patterns are unconscious, then bringing them into awareness is the first step toward changing them. You cannot change what you do not see. So the process begins with observation, with honest reflection, with asking yourself questions that many people avoid. What emotional patterns keep appearing in my life? What kinds of situations do I repeatedly find myself in? What beliefs do I hold about myself and the world that may be shaping these experiences? When you begin to answer these questions truthfully, a shift occurs. You start to see that your experiences are not entirely random, that there is a structure beneath them, a pattern that has been guiding your choices and reactions. And with that awareness comes the possibility of change. Breaking free from emotional pain does not mean you will never feel sadness, anger, or fear again. Those emotions are part of being alive. But it does mean that you no longer remain trapped in cycles that repeat endlessly without your awareness. Because the moment you see the pattern, you are no longer fully controlled by it. You begin to respond instead of react. You begin to choose instead of repeat. And slowly, the cycle that once felt inevitable begins to loosen its grip. But there is still another layer to uncover. Even when you become aware of your patterns, there is something within you that may continue to hold on to them. Something that resists letting go, even when letting go would bring you peace. And that force is the ego. The ego is subtle, persuasive, and deeply embedded in the way you perceive yourself and the world. It does not appear as an obvious enemy. Instead, it disguises itself as your identity, your voice, your sense of self. It tells you stories about who you are, what you deserve, and why your pain is justified. And the more you believe these stories, the more tightly you remain bound to your suffering. At its core, the ego feeds on conflict. It thrives on blame, judgment, and the illusion that you are separate from everything around you. It convinces you that your pain defines you, that your past determines your future, and that your wounds are proof of your identity. It whispers that you have every right to hold on to resentment, to replay the past, to remain attached to what hurt you. But what it never tells you is that by doing so, you're keeping the pain alive. One of the most powerful illusions the ego creates is the identity of the victim. It encourages you to see yourself as someone who has been wronged, someone who has been treated unfairly, someone whose suffering is caused entirely by external forces. And while there may be truth in what happened to you, this identity becomes a trap. Because the moment you define yourself as a victim, you give away your power to change. The ego wants you to believe that your healing depends on something outside of you. An apology, recognition, justice, or a change in circumstances. It keeps you waiting, hoping that something external will resolve the internal pain. But as long as you are waiting, you're not moving forward. You're not transforming. You're simply reinforcing the same pattern. This is why true healing requires a shift in perspective. It requires you to recognize that you're not your thoughts, not your past, not the voice that constantly reminds you of what went wrong. That voice is a pattern, a conditioned response, something that has been repeated so often that it feels like truth. But it is not you. When you begin to observe that voice instead of identifying with it, something changes. You create distance between yourself and the narrative. You begin to see the thoughts for what they are, not facts, but interpretations. And in that space, you regain the ability to choose how you respond. This is where real freedom begins. The ego loses its power when you stop feeding it. When you stop replaying the same stories, when you stop justifying your pain, when you stop identifying with your wounds, it begins to weaken. And as it weakens, a different part of you starts to emerge. A quieter, more grounded awareness that is not driven by fear or attachment. But letting go of the ego is not easy, because in many ways, it feels like losing a part of yourself. The pain, the resentment, the identity you built around your experiences, all of it feels familiar. And as uncomfortable as it may be, familiarity often feels safer than the unknown. This is why many people hold on to their suffering, even when it hurts them. Not because they want to suffer, but because they do not yet know who they are without it. And this is where the next transformation begins. Because beyond the ego, beyond the resistance, beyond the unconscious patterns, there is a deeper truth about pain that most people never fully understand. Pain is not something to be eliminated. It is something to be experienced, understood, and ultimately transformed. Most of us are taught from an early age to avoid pain, to suppress it, ignore it, or distract ourselves from it. We are told to be strong, to move on quickly, to not dwell on negative emotions. And while these messages may seem helpful on the surface, they often lead to a deeper problem. Because what you suppress does not disappear. It simply moves beneath the surface. Unfelt emotions do not vanish. They remain within you, shaping your thoughts, your reactions, and your behavior in ways you may not even realize. They manifest as anxiety, tension, irritability, or a constant sense of unease. And the more you try to avoid them, the stronger they become. This is why true healing requires a different approach. Instead of running from pain, you must learn to face it, not with judgment, not with resistance, but with awareness. When an emotion arises, whether it is sadness, anger, or fear, the instinct is often to escape it, to distract yourself, to push it away, to tell yourself that you should not feel this way. But what if, instead of resisting it, you allowed it to be there? What if you simply observed it? When you do this, something unexpected happens. The emotion begins to change. It no longer feels overwhelming or consuming. It becomes something you can witness, something that moves through you rather than something that defines you. Pain, when fully felt, begins to dissolve, not because you forced it to go away, but because you stopped holding on to it. Every emotion has a natural lifespan. It rises, it peaks, and it eventually fades. But when you resist it, when you attach a story to it, when you replay it over and over in your mind, you extend that lifespan indefinitely. You turn a moment into a cycle, and breaking that cycle requires presence. It requires you to sit with the discomfort, to feel it without trying to fix it, to allow it without trying to control it. This is not weakness. It is strength in its purest form, because it takes far more courage to face your pain than to run from it. And as you begin to do this, you start to notice something profound. The pain that once felt unbearable begins to lose its intensity. The emotions that once controlled you begin to soften, and in their place, something new begins to emerge. Clarity. You begin to see your experiences differently, not as punishments, not as evidence that something is wrong with you, but as moments that have shaped you, taught you, and revealed parts of yourself that were previously hidden. This is where transformation begins, because pain, when approached with awareness, becomes more than just something to endure. It becomes a tool for growth. Every difficult experience carries within it the potential for change. It forces you to confront aspects of yourself that you may have ignored. It challenges your beliefs, your expectations, your sense of identity, and in doing so, it creates the opportunity for something new to emerge. This is what Carl Jung described as transformation, the process of turning inner struggle into inner strength. Not by avoiding the darkness, but by bringing it into consciousness. Your pain is not meaningless. It is not random. It is part of a process that, if you allow it, can lead you to a deeper understanding of yourself. But this transformation does not happen automatically. It requires a shift in how you relate to your experiences. It requires you to stop asking, why this is happening to me, and start asking what this is trying to show me. That simple shift changes everything, because instead of seeing pain as something that holds you back, you begin to see it as something that moves you forward. Instead of resisting it, you start to work with it. And this is where true power emerges. You begin to realize that the same experiences that once caused you suffering can also become the foundation of your strength. That the same pain that once felt like a burden can become a source of insight, resilience, and clarity. This is the essence of inner transformation. It is not about becoming someone new. It is about uncovering who you are beneath the layers of conditioning, fear, and resistance. It is about letting go of what no longer serves you and allowing something deeper to take its place. And as you move through this process, something shifts in the way you experience life. You become less reactive, less attached, less controlled by external circumstances. You begin to move with life rather than against it. You no longer see pain as something to fear. You see it as something to understand. And in that understanding, you find freedom. Because freedom is not the absence of pain. It is the absence of resistance to it. It is the ability to experience life fully without being trapped by it. And when you reach that point, you begin to see that everything you have gone through, every challenge, every loss, every moment of struggle has been leading you here to a place where you are no longer defined by your past, to a place where you are no longer controlled by your pain, to a place where you can choose consciously how you live, how you respond, and who you become. This is where the cycle ends, not because pain disappears, but because it no longer has power over you. And from that moment forward, your life begins to change.